Well, guys, time to get started. And I have a few things to say before I go ahead and start talking about Raphael. And that is, first of all, I've read your quiz one. I realize that I'm going to have to put together a video, a PowerPoint, and talk to you about kind of some of the overarching ideas that I gleaned from that quiz and your responses. It was kind of open-ended. I wanted to see what you guys like, what you're interested in, why you like things, which is really what the question was about. But I got to get into some other issues about organization, about sources, and some other kinds of things that we'll need to get straightened out before we go forward. So we're going to do that on Wednesday. Second thing, I found this on the bulletin board just outside the classroom, and I thought I would let you know about it, particularly because hardly anyone's coming in the building for class, and so you may not have an opportunity to see this. But based on your responses, I'm thinking that a few of you might be interested in this opportunity. It's titled Science, Magic, and Medicine in Renaissance Florence. And the description goes as such. How and when did humans in the West begin to draw lines between science and magic? When did alchemy become chemistry? How and when did we begin to heal the human body with medical rather than magical thinking? And how did we begin to redefine both of those terms? From the 14th through the 18th centuries, Florence was the center of new movements in science and medicine. From the inventions of Leonardo da Vinci to the telescopes of Galileo and the alchemical mysteries practiced by the Medici princes. Florentines and Renaissance Italians invented new theories and practices in the realms of science, magic, and medicine. This class will study these remarkable new inventions and theories, as well as take you to key sites of discovery and learning. The Galileo Museum, we'll see Galileo's original telescopes, as well as chemistry equipment, anatomical models, maps, astro labels, from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment. The Leonardo da Vinci Museum, a secret passageway through the old palace of Florence, where we'll get a behind-the-scenes look at the Grand Duke's personal alchemy studio. A trip to the National Archives to see 16th century recipes for medicines as well as poisons. If you're interested in this course, please contact Dr. Lisa Lilly, that's LLILLIE at maryville.edu, or Dr. Jim Harp, JHARF at Maryville. Space is limited. And so, looked pretty interesting. I'd like to go, but you know how it is. So, any questions? No? Well, hearing no questions, let's talk about this painting. Very famous, one of the most famous Raphael paintings ever. And it's titled Philosophy, but more people still seem to refer to it in its colloquial name, the School of Athens. And it is in the Vatican, and it is a fresco, and you can see this archway here, but you can also see the door. See, part of this is kind of cut off. And it's what the Italians did a lot during the Renaissance and High Renaissance was if there was a doorway, they would paint around it. You saw that with Leonardo's Last Supper as well. And so anyway, philosophy, and this is in the Vatican, and it has everything to do with the kinds of issues I just read to you about science, magic, and medicine in Florence, Italy during the Renaissance. And so this is really, it's a magnificent fresco, and it's an acknowledgement by the church, by the Pope, that all of this pre-Christian stuff was valuable, was actually fundamental, and it wasn't in conflict with Christianity. And that's a very important point, because prior to the Renaissance, this kind of stuff was seen as antithetical to the Bible, to the church, to Christianity. One example here from this study abroad course is Galileo. He had telescopes. He was mapping out the solar system and other celestial bodies. There was Nicholas Copernicus, who said that the earth revolves around the sun. That was antithetical to Christian teaching, or at least at that time they thought so, because they thought that the earth was the center of the universe. And so we have a lot of things changing, and this painting is as important for documenting the change in attitude as well as its artistic and its aesthetic beauty. And so let me show you a couple of things about this. First of all, that one-point perspective that we've been talking about a lot. This is the Italian model. And you can see the vanishing point actually works quite nicely. You see a little inconsistencies here, but that has to do with the fact that this plane is lower, and then there's a step up, then a step up. And so those of you who do linear perspectives knows that it goes like this, like that, like this, like that. But in general, these lines lead to the space between the two central figures, which is Plato and Aristotle. And so one thing that doesn't quite fit the perspective, and I want to point this out, and that's this box that this fellow is leaning on and writing, taking notes, contemplating. This does not follow the horizon line, and the vanishing point. This is an early example of what you would call multiple point vanishing points. And so that vanishing point for this object would be up here on the horizon line. Because it's not perpendicular, that is parallel to the surface. And so anyway, this is a 2-point perspective. This line here goes all the way out to this point, and it would vanish here, this one up here somewhere. But at any rate, it is an early example, and it's evidence that they were figuring this out more than simple 1-point perspective, because you can't see everything flat. There are things that are turned. There are things that point a different direction in space. And so that's some of the technical issue. And here's a list of what we think all of these figures represent. And so 14 Plato, 15 Aristotle, as I was saying. But what he did was take a lot of the philosophers from ancient Greece and portray some of his fellow artists. For example, 14, Plato, but this is the image of Leonardo da Vinci. Aristotle, this is another artist. 13, Heraclitus. Michelangelo, this is Michelangelo, one of the other great artists of the High Renaissance. And I want to see if I can zoom in on this little part. This guy right there, kind of peeking around the corner, that is Raphael himself. And so it tells you a couple of things. One, he kind of saw himself in the company of all of these great minds and great artists. The second thing is that he's actually much younger than those two. And so anyway, Raphael, that's 9, where's 8, 9? See, and this could be Raphael too, but we're not sure about that. But back up in here, we know. And so anyway, this is Raphael. And he's starting to deal with a couple of other issues in creating illusions. Show you the 1-2-point perspective. Raphael, Pope Leo X with cardinals. Giulio de' Medici and Luigi de' Rossi, 1517. There's the Pope. And so one of the things that's happening now with our High Renaissance is that Italian artists are getting as adept at describing very shiny surfaces and very intricate surfaces. Believably, it's natural. It's, look at the shine on this finial that's on his throne. Look at the quality of the velvet, and he has the velvet robe here as well. You see the fur, you see the book, presumably the Bible, presumably as an illuminated manuscript. We've been seeing a lot of those through the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. And you can see this is how this would look. And so it is oil, and it has the kind of illusion and realism that we found maybe almost 100 years prior in Jan van Eyck and some of the other northern painters. So by this time, we have a complete cross current of ideas and techniques. And so one of the other issues I wanted to bring up to you about this painting, and it is a breakthrough again by Raphael. Notice the dark background, and you see just a little bit of light on this wall, a little bit here. Rest of this, pretty dark. That is another way of describing space that really doesn't have very much to do with one or 2 point or multiple point perspective. It is called chiaroscuro, which means dark drawing or dark painting, or it's called tenebrism. But however you refer to this, this is, you make the background dark that push the figures into the foreground. And so because it's dark, you don't really need to fill out all of the space. The dark background does that. It's how we see things. A dark background pushes everything forward. And so this is we'll see artists develop this idea as well. Portraits, Baldassare Castiglione, again, very good with the details, all of the hairs of the beard. And this points to why they call this the High Renaissance, because it really is the apex. It is about as good as it'll get for a long time. They kind of figured all of this stuff out in terms of creating naturalism, illusionism, lifelike painting, and lifelike sculpture. And that hadn't been done for 2,000 years. Not since the ancient Greeks did we have such a high point in what you would call naturalism. Reading your essays, I found that many of you appreciated the work that you chose because of that issue, because of the skill involved, because of the lifelike cloth, beard, eyes. This is like so good. Look at the little reflections on the eyeball, and you see that the eyeball is very, very subtly, but distinctly, it's shaded. So it appears round. And if you study anatomy and you study photography and you study how light works, you'll find that that is a very astute observation of nature, and in this case, Baldassare Castiglione. So, we got this time where a lot of these things come together. Now, I want to bring out this issue at this time, and that is that I'm really hoping that the kinds of things that I showed you about James Burke and the invention of one-point perspective and how he held up the grid to kind of judge distance and space. He said, see my hand? It's as big as the church over here. Or the film I showed you by David Hockney, where he talks about using lenses and camera obscura as a way to make lifelike paintings through the use of projected light and projected light through a lens. All of those things, all of these inventions, to my mind, and I hope to your mind, don't diminish the quality of the work. In fact, they used all of the tools available to them at that time. We still do that. How many of you guys use computers when you're making your artwork? Does that take away from the value, the artistic experience of your work? That when you're making frames and things around the letters, or even taking the letters, picking the font, and typing it out. Back in the old days, as I could say, that was all done by hand. And that is impressive. But the fact that you guys are using the tools available to you at this time does not diminish the quality of the finished product. And so anyway, I showed you that to kind of give you an insight as to what the technology probably was, but not as a slam or diminishing the importance or the quality of this work. And so another Raphael and Galatia, and we see this again. This is kind of like the Botticelli. Figures are a lot different. Figures in some ways, they weigh more, they're more filled out, if you will. And this will become the kind of figures that you'll start to see in Western art, that they're anatomically correct, but they're also kind of, how should I say this? They account for the muscles and the joints and the bones. You can see the rib cage on occasion. You can see the muscles in the back. You can see the pecs. You can see the glutes. You can see pretty much a pretty sophisticated understanding of the human body. And we saw how Da Vinci was furthering our understanding of the human body. And so this was science. This is that study abroad class that I'm talking about. And this is, we're watching this go right through the years, early 16th century. And so the other of the big three Italian high Renaissance artists is this guy, Michelangelo. And some of you wrote about him, especially the creation of Adam, got a couple of hits on that. Sculpture. He's a guy who really understood human anatomy. You can see the muscles, the skin, sometimes the veins on the arms, the little bit of flesh behind on side of the knee, everything, the ankles, it's like perfection. As a matter of fact, this Pietà and Michelangelo made numerous Pietas. It was a theme in the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, and so this was made prior. It was right at 1500. So this is what Michelangelo did. I put a star by it. It's really quite. It's astonishing, the realism. The other part is that if you look this up, you can still find evidence of this. This statue was attacked. Yep, somebody attacked a statue, came at this with a hammer, and got through and knocked a couple of fingers off of Mary's hand before he was apprehended by guards. And that brings up a good question. Why would somebody attack artwork? Hey, anybody got an idea? Is it just sheer madness? Well, let me throw a couple of things at you. First of all, that kind of activity still goes on today. There are some people who still believe that these objects represent something not of their faith or belief, and so they want to destroy it. Were people in Afghanistan taking target practice with their artillery, their cannons, at some depictions of Buddha carved out on the side of a mountain. Thought it was sacrilegious, thought it was Buddhist, it was against the 10 Commandments, it was a lot of things. So those are kind of things, but probably more broadly is that there are certain artworks that come to represent a civilization. And this, along with the Mona Lisa and a few others, represent Western culture, such as it is. And so they become icons, and it is therefore an object that some people would love to destroy. By the way, when we're talking about the Mona Lisa, have any of you been to the Louvre? Nobody? Well, I haven't either. But the Mona Lisa in the Louvre in Paris is kept in the basement, and it kind of gets brought up on something that's kind of like an elevator inside the wall, and they bring it up behind this window that's made of bulletproof glass, because they're afraid somebody's going to try to destroy this painting, and in part because there are people who would do such a thing, because it represents Western society, Western civilization, sort of the overall Western belief system. So anyway, this is the dead Christ. This is the Virgin Mary. One of the things that we saw this in the 15th and it carries through the 16th century. They make the Mother of Christ actually look quite young and quite beautiful. again, that has everything to do with connecting some of the ancient goddesses of beauty with the Virgin Mary. And so she becomes a standard for purity and of beauty. Here's another Pietà made much later, 50 years later. And you can see what's happening here. This is Michelangelo's career spans a long, long time. And later in life, he starts to abandon a lot of the anatomical grace in favor of expressive distortions. The arms become longer, the hands become thinner, the legs much more skin and bones, if you will. Wasn't so much about the anatomy as much as it was about expressing the sorrow, the grief, and the downright ugliness of the killing of Christ. And so, yeah, those things kind of change over time. There's another early Michelangelo, put a star by this one too. This is in Florence. This is before he went to Rome to paint the Sistine Chapel. And again, we talked about all of those Davids. And David, as I said earlier, was sort of the patron saint of Florence. Florence was a little city that was very smart, very prosperous, and had to defend itself from bigger, badder enemies, period. And so David seemed to be the best metaphor. And so, but look at this. This is like the veins going up the arm. I mean, this is, you can see the tendons. You can see, I mean, this is very, very anatomically, almost anatomically perfect. He's almost got the six pack here. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6. Before that was even a thing. And so the other part is that David in this case is actually kind of a lot bigger, a little stronger, and he's kind of a little bit more in thought. And you can see the tension in his arm. You can see that if anybody were to threaten him, he would be ready to attack. But as it stands right now, he's just quietly on guard, sort of the sentinel, sort of the protector of Florence. And so this is from the tomb of Pope Julius II. Pope Julius was the pope that commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. As such, Michelangelo resisted, but the Pope was the Pope. He was the guy, and he had to do what he said. And so he painted the Sistine Chapel, which we'll look at in a minute. And he also carved out the tomb for Pope Julius II, too. And so this is Moses, and you see here the 10 Commandments, and Moses typically pictured with a long beard because he was old and he was very wise. Now, the guy's got some guns, to be quite honest. He's a little more muscular than you would depict someone of this age. But the real issue is this. What are those things? They're horns. And it comes from a misinterpretation of a Bible that was translated into Old Greek. And as I was saying earlier, the people of the Renaissance, especially the Italian Renaissance, were going around and researching and digging up all of these old manuscripts and maps and anything that they could get, anything that was written, they wanted. And so these Italians misconstrued what that was written about Moses in the ancient manuscript. They mistook the word, and I don't know the word exactly, but the word for halo for the word horns. And so they were talking about Moses with a halo. They read this as Moses with horns, and that's why that's there. One of the more quirky things about art history. And so, yeah, Michelangelo is just prolific and rebellious prisoner, bound slave, and this is from probably from the tomb of Pope Julius. More, the tomb of Giuliano de' Medici. See, after the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo went back to carving, mostly marble. He was very adept at that. One of the things that they did, and this happens in Michelangelo's work, and it happens in the Northern Renaissance. This is kind of a quirky little thing too. This is a woman, but oftentimes they described a woman's body much like a man's body with kind of breast attached to the man's body, which is kind of odd. But anyway, that's one of the things that if you see that, you know you're doing late 15th, early 16th art, both in painting and in sculpture. And so later, in life, Michelangelo paints this. But the first thing is we'll talk about is the ceiling. And so you see it was built in 1473, 1508, 1512 is when he painted this ceiling. And then much later, almost 25 years later, he painted the back wall, the altar wall, if you will. So, my computer seems to be, oh, there it is. That's what it looks like when you're standing under the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It's very high up, and it was very difficult to paint. As I was saying earlier, I know a couple of you guys wrote about this as your favorite, and it is yet another iconic Renaissance work. It's called The Creation of Adam. There have been scholars that have argued that this was not so much about the creation of Adam, but giving Adam consciousness. And that's why, in some ways, to support that idea, that this is thought to be the shape of a brain, and that's what he was doing. We don't know that for sure. This little piece right here, that little bit of negative space between the hand of Adam and the hand of God, that's probably one of the most important bits of negative space in Western art history. And so, I'll tell you a little bit more about this, because some time ago, 25, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, when I was in graduate school, this ceiling was restored. And sometimes you'll find pictures of this at the beginning of the cleaning and restoration and at the end of the cleaning and restoration. And so see the difference. Bottom line is that some of the panels themselves are even more drastically changed by the restoration. What happened? Why did they have to restore it? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that the roof over the centuries, over almost 500 years, would leak from time to time, and it would cause cracks, and it would cause pieces of plaster to actually fall down. That was one problem. Another problem was, and if you're Catholic, you'll know what I'm talking about, candles. Like candles on the altar, and around the perimeter, oftentimes you have what they call votive candles. And it may be a little apse or something, or a statue, and you have a kneeler and you pray for whatever you pray, and you light a candle. So candles are all over this. And you say, well, but this is way high. Bottom line is 500 years of lighting candles, and that little tiny bit of soot and smoke and wax residue that floats its way to the ceiling really made this this whole ceiling just in very poor shape. And so they restored it and they brought back what is, they believe, the original colors. They're much brighter. You still see some of the cracks and things in there, but it's much better. It caused a lot of controversy. A lot of people said, well, the smoke and the damage, that's all part of the history of the piece. The other part was that wasn't the first time it had been attempted to be restored. As a matter of fact, they tried that a number of times, and they did a poor job. And so when they got up there to restore this, they found parts of it were a real mess. And so anyway, I told you I did this in the early part, and 25 years later or so, he was commissioned to paint the wall behind the altar. And this is called the Last Judgment. And this has been restored too. And it's been kind of monkeyed with over time. At one point, a time when things got kind of conservative, and they hired an artist to come by and put loincloths on all of these nude people, which pretty much damaged the work. I'll show you this too. See that idea I was talking about women's bodies? It's almost like they slap on breast onto a man's body, and oftentimes a man's face as well. Show you this. This is the Last Judgment. This is a young Christ, and these are all of the people who are in hell, and some of them are being lifted up by angels and by other people from heaven, but by and large, I'll show you this. It's a particularly gruesome image, and that is the skin of a human being without the body, with the person having been skinned alive, so to speak. Some scholars believe that this is actually a portrait of Michelangelo himself that he put into the work. But at any rate, 1536, 41, same thing I showed you with the Pietà. In the early part of the 1500s, it was about beauty, about classicism. It was about the young Virgin Mary in the Pietà. And then by the 1540s or so, things take a dark turn. That it's more about darkness and exaggeration and let me get back to this. This emotion, grief, darkness, not the triumphal, or in this case, just the lamentation. And so things get kind of, the attitudes start to change over the 16th century. And so, aside from Michelangelo, Raphael, and Leonardo, there were some other artists working. Andrea del Sarto, Madonna of the Harpies, and harpies, by the way, means these little angels here. They're called harpies. And so this is really kind of the same sort of thing that we've been seeing for centuries. The Madonna, the book, the infant Jesus, and so on. Bottom line, it's starting to get dark in the background as a way to push the figures forward. A lot of the same icons, a lot of the same things, but still, this baby Jesus is a baby. Got the halo, but he's not giving us the blessing. He's not carrying a book, and so on. Architecture, I'm going through this kind of quickly. Kind of becomes more classical and more simplified. All of that ornamentation that we talk about in the Gothic, by the time we get to the High Renaissance, very austere, it's very clean, it's very orderly, it's all based on mathematical proportions, it's clean. And so this is yet another indicator of Bramante's design for St. Peter's. Michelangelo, Buonarroti. That's our Michelangelo. And he was a guy that understood space. And this is the aerial view. But again, orderly, geometry, symmetry, so on. You see these two windows, they're low on the corners, but straight across this way. Nothing haphazard, nothing left to chance. St. Peter's. Check this out. Triangular pediment above an arched window, rectangular windows, triangular, semicircle, triangular arch, etc. All of these things are just about proportions. And it's 3 stories, and I got to say that was kind of about the limit. It was hard to build higher than that. They didn't have the technology of having strengthened hard steel to reinforce the structures. Again, 3 equal, all of the triangular pediments all the way around, and on the top, the arched pediments. And so this is Michelangelo, and he designed this too, and it's the vestibule of the Laurentinian Library in Florence. And again, arch, triangle, arch, arch, triangle, all of these things, they work this out as order, as symmetry, as geometry. And that was the standard for the 16th century, but that will change. I got some other painters here of the 16th century. Bellini, great painter. And again, Madonna and Child and Saints. Kind of go back to the old days. Christ giving the blessing. Bellini, Feast of the Gods. Again, something that's out of ancient Greece and Rome. And you can see they're feasting. They're probably kind of drunk too. An amphora probably full of wine, and somebody drinking here, and just so on. Castelfranco. And probably the other guy that makes a big splash is Titian. Pastoral Symphony and nude women, the clothes men, the bodies that have a little more weight. Titian, the Assumption of the Virgin. You can see all of the elements of the things that they figured out in the Renaissance. The idea of space and the clouds, and the idea of having a bunch of harpies cherub, seraphim, so on. Angels. And meeting of Bacchus and Ariadne. And so, yeah, right out of classicism. But I did want to show you this, and I pulled this out because Titian was really quite famous in his time. And he was the kind of artist that exemplified the Renaissance because he learned from all of these great people that we've been talking about. And the Venus of Urbino, we talk about this woman as a Venus, which goes back to ancient Rome, goddess of beauty. Has an attendant here. I want to show you this. Oh, don't have it. At any rate. Titian, Venus of Urbino. I thought I had Manet's Olympia. This picture will be kind of parodied and exploited in the 19th century, but this one here is actually an icon as well. Did portraits, and here's something that we're starting to see. Women artists. And we start to see them in the 16th century, and that is a significant change. And so Fontana, and this is a little YouTube video, but I don't have enough time to show that Titian and Palma Giovanni. Look at this. This is full-blown Mannerism right here. So by the end of that century, all of those things that were invented in the high Renaissance kind of get thrown away in favor of doing works that were much more chaotic, much more emotional, and in some cases, even more symbolic. That makes a comeback. And I'll show you Mannerism. This is true Mannerism here. All of the things about proportion and that vanishing point being right in the middle, that's all gone. This composition is a circle. The center point is this cloth this young woman is holding. And presumably it's there to wipe off the blood, sweat, or whatever of the dead Christ. But this is a whole different idea. This was seen as being very chaotic, very uncouth, very imbalanced, based on Renaissance ideas. This thing's clicking like 2 times. Here you go. Another Mannerist painting, elongated figures, a lot of darkness. Down here on the bottom, it's kind of chaotic. As I was showing you with the Assumption of the Virgin, there was this other kind of activity of making levels down here in hell. And I believe this is the angel Gabriel here, but the rebel angels, the ones led by Lucifer, cast into hell. Parmigianino, self-portrait in a convex mirror, which is itself kind of interesting. Look at the size of that hand. we wouldn't look at this as being very different today, because a lot of what we do with photography actually looks like this. Take a selfie, put your hand up close, you'll see the same kind of distorted perspective that a convex mirror will give you. But Parmigianino, this is, again, Mannerism embodied. High Renaissance, they say, a lot of scholars point to 1520 when Raphael died, and that's when Michelangelo started doing more darker, more exaggerated, much more emotionally charged works. And you see 1534, this is the Madonna with the long neck. And the idea of the long neck being that that was considered fashionable and elegant. And not only is the neck long, but the baby's long too. And for some reason at the time, they thought that it was elegant, elongated. It's not particularly anatomically correct anymore. They're sacrificing all of that knowledge in service of emotional means, ends, messages. Cupid, folly, and time. This, again, this is another Mannerist thing, and the space doesn't really make any sense. Again, it's a composition that kind of goes circular on you. This is a very famous painting, by the way, Venus, Cupid, folly, and time. And they start to go much more for symbolism and metaphors. And if you want to kind of figure this out, time. This is time. This is Venus. This is Cupid. And presumably that's folly. But that's it. Mannerism. Symbolism. Get rid of all of the anatomical correctness. Change the composition, change the space, go for a much more emotional response, or tell a story with all of the metaphors, all of the different images kind of combined in one. And so, last one, I promise. Sofonisba, another woman artist. And so, I see it's getting time. Any questions? Well, I got one question for you. We're talking about the 1500s. How about Christopher Columbus? He sailed at the behest of Ferdinand and Isabella, King and Queen of Spain, sailed to North America. What nationality was Columbus? Was he Spanish? Give you a hint. No, he was Italian. And so he was another guy that was a beneficiary of all of this knowledge, all of this science, all of this artistic, medicine, chemistry, everything. That's how he knew you could get to the east by sailing west, because he was Italian and he benefited from all of these scholars and thinkers of the Renaissance. So, no questions, how about if I see you guys Wednesday? Good. We'll call it a day. Stay safe, stay warm, wear your mask if you go outside.
Thank you.
All right, see you, Robin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.